In our previous episode on setups, we covered air pressure, wheel offsets, and stagger. In this episode, we're going to talk about ride heights and scale numbers. And we're going to do it from a standpoint of someone who's new to racing. So we're going to cover everything you need to know here. We're working with Rachel's Leaf car for this. And if you do not have a set of scales, I'm going to cover a few things that I would do to be able to tell what's going on with my car. All right, let's get busy. Here's how we start out. I set the car up the way I would expect to have the car set up for a feature race at the end of the night. So you see I've got my air pressures here, my wheel offsets, and here's my stagger. So here's the question. Do I do ride heights first or do I do the scaling first? And that can be really tricky because these affect each other significantly. And what if we've got a brand new car, a car that's new to us, it didn't have the right springs on it, or you don't have any numbers for the car for where to start with that worked for it, or anything. Like, how do you go about doing that? Here's how I do it. I set the front of the car neutral and level, okay? And then I turn around and I try to put some rake in the back of the car on the frame rail. That's the way I do it. What do I mean by that? And we're going to show under the car and stuff, but for right now I want to show you this. On the front of the car, the lower control arm, those inner bolts in the frame, where that lower control arm goes through, those two bolts, and then the center of the ball joint that goes up into the spindle, just to start with as a neutral baseline that would pretty much work on most any street stock. If I can just set that level all the way across, I know that's a good neutral baseline for me to start working with the car. It doesn't mean that a particular car might not like to be a little lower, a little higher, over to the left, over to the right. There's a lot of different things that can affect what works best for a car based on, which spindle height is used, the length of the ball joints, all kind of different factors. But when you're out to lunch and just beginning, I don't know where to even start, this gets you started. How do I measure this? From the ground, just a ruler up to the center of that bolt that's going through that lower control arm into the frame. Center of that, a ruler there, and then turn around. Here's a tip. If you've got a stock stamped lower control arm, where that lip is, that the ball joint's going up through, that lip that you can put a ruler against is just about in the center of the ball joint itself. So just measure to that lip right there. And remember, this height overall is going to change based on the length of the ball joints themselves, which spindle's on it, and which tire you're running. So a car could be 8 inches across here in this level, 9 inches, 10 inches. It's possible to be at any of those numbers and the car be neutral and level. That's why you have to be really careful about somebody telling you what their measurement is on their car versus yours if it's not the exact same type of car built by the same manufacturer with the same lower control arms, the same ball joints, the same spindles, the same tires. It's you got to be really careful on comparing individual measurements car to car when you do that. So this is a way to get started. That would be what I'd call a flat neutral front end right there. Now, what about rake to the rear? Well, I always want my rear end, my rear of my car to be higher than the front, okay, to start with. And the easiest way to do that is just on a leaf spring car, for example, with a stub on the front. So I'm just going to draw a stub here. And it turns up, and so you've got this Camaro stub right here on the front. You really can't use a piece of attached frame rail going back the way the car was built. You don't know what that represents because you don't know how the car was built. But you can take a digital angle finder, like a magnetic angle finder, and you can slap on the bottom of that stub. Now, every one of these from the factory will be a little bit wavy and wiggly. You're not going to be 100% accurate, but that's okay because we're just trying to make sure that the car is kind of in range, a workable number to start with. And I like on a leaf car, I like 1 to 2 degrees. And I'm also, my cool car I built over there, I built it at 2 degrees as well. But with it, you've got a frame rail that goes all the way back, and I just slapped my angle finder on the frame rail itself. So I like 1 to 2 degrees. And the reason being is that back here where that leaf hooks on, I'm trying to get that leaf up as much as I can. I don't want to cause myself problems with having way too much rake in the car, but I don't want that leaf to be any lower than it has to be, because that's affecting, your anti-squat. When you torque up on the rear end, the lower the front of that leaf is, the harder it is for that car to load up and use the weight of the car to, increase your tire load. All right, so I want those up on the front as much as I can get them up. So 1 to 2 degrees right here. Once I know I've got workable ride heights, then I'll turn around and I get my scales, set them up, plug them all in, zero them out, put the car on them, bounce the car. We'll go through all of that. And then I'll turn around, and from that point on, I do my ride heights on my scales. So all of my scales are exactly 2 inches tall. And so when I'm measuring with a ruler and writing down numbers, I'm just subtracting 2 inches from it. And the reason I do that, the main reason I do that, is because I can see under the car and be able to get my head underneath there and get a reading and stuff. And like with this Camaro here, I can't be able to get underneath the front of the car and actually measure ride heights with it sitting on the floor. It's just too low with the body on it and everything. And that's most cars that are out there. So I always do it on the scales. It would be better if you've got a set of the pads that the scales go into that gets you up like 6 inches off the ground. Those are nice. But don't have them. The scales themselves that I'm using, these are the ProForm. I bought these 5 or 6 years ago, I think for like $700 or $750 is what I gave. It was the cheapest thing out there. It was like half the price of anything else, y'all. They're not the greatest. Yes, they're significantly less money, but like it only gives the percentage and the weight per tire all the way around. It doesn't tell you like left and rear and cross and left rear bite. You just have to do math like on a paper or something. I'll show y'all how I do that. But you have to do that stuff. So when these finally do give up, hopefully at this point I can afford a better set of scales. So I'm not telling you not to buy these. If you're on a super tight budget, they do work. They are accurate. And like I said, these are the wired ones, and I've been using them for 5 or 6 years, and I scale my cars pretty much every time I go to the track. I'm always trying to learn something, especially if I make changes that improve the car at the track. I try to like leave everything alone and then turn around and the next day in the shop, put it right back on the scales and like see and understand what that difference was. So yeah, they do work, and they make these in wireless now. I've got links to both of those on my website, dirtracelife.com. Drop down to the bottom and you'll see drop down lists of all the different things like on Amazon that I've purchased. I always put the links on there for that. Yep, we draw 4% commission on any link that comes through from my website. So just be aware, that is one of the ways that I help support what we're doing here, y'all. So I appreciate it when you buy things from us. But even if you don't buy something that's directly what I used, when you go through those links, it still adds to the commission. So thank you. All right, let's get the car up on these scales and see what the numbers say. All right, it's really important to make sure you hook up the correct scale on the correct corner. So like all scaling systems, they're going to tell you like which scale, left front, right front. And you have to get all that correct, because like on the readout on the screen, you got to have your 4 positions correct. Otherwise, your percentages and your weight balances and everything, it's like everything will be wrong. Everything will be wrong. I have accidentally hooked up the wires wrong before and didn't realize it. And woo, will you chase your tail trying to figure out what's going on with your scale numbers until you realize that. I had it happen once and it broke me. I wasted like 2 hours in the shop scratching my head and hating on the car, I'm telling you. All right, so what I do is I just sit them on the ground outside of each tire and wheel. Make sure nothing is on the scales. Make sure they're not touching the car's tire or anything. Because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it on and we're going to zero all our scales. All right, so they're all sitting there. And then I'm going to turn it on. And I'm gonna hit my tare feature, which it showed 0 already. They're all showing 0. Everything's good, they're all 0. Now, I take, and the way I do it, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but I put the car in gear. Okay, so I put it in low gear, because I don't want it to roll off the scales. Sits you right there. I'm going to take, and I'm going to jack the back of the car up. Since it's in gear, the back wheels are holding, and so I'm going to jack it up under the rear end and sit the car down on the rear first. They don't have to be perfectly under the center. Just make sure you don't have tire cup like hanging off the edge of your scale. That's the main thing. Don't have any tire hanging off the edge, nothing like that. All right, so now that I got my rear. All right, on the front, I really like to use 2 jacks, one on each control arm, because if you try to jack one side up and put one pad on and then let it down and take the jack and come to the other side, what happens is you'll create a bind between the two, because the tire will be pulled in on one of them and it'll mess your readings up. So I like to put a jack on each one underneath the control arm in the front or the back, however you can get to it. I like to get the control arm, not the frame, because I can't perfectly get all of the control arm where it doesn't, release. But if you get the jack under the control arm, you're not unloading all of it and dropping down, because if you get it under the frame and then that tire and wheel drops all the way down, then as it comes back up on the jack, it's pushing out. And so I try to hook that control arm. So I got that one there. And then I go underneath this one here. A little more. Alright, so I got them both there. And then what I'll do is I'm not going to let it all the way down. We'll go back and forth. Stop right there and then get the rest of this one. Like that. And the rest of this one. Like that. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm trying to keep the car from binding on one of them and then creating a false reading between the two. Okay, so now, check it out. I'm grabbing the back bumper and I'm giving it a pull, a push, little shake. What am I doing there? Well, I'm giving the car an opportunity for those tires to kind of scoot those scales a little bit, settle down, flatten down. Any bushing, anything that's kind of binding, stuck, holding a little bit of tension on it, giving it a chance to release. Let's see. Don't have Rachel in the car, and I really need to do scale numbers, especially starting out with a driver or driver weight in the car. So let's put some driver weight in the car. All right, so here's the deal. I don't have to actually set the weight down in the driver's seat. I can technically, and this is something about scaling the car, like bolting on ballast and stuff. The scales are looking at weight sitting straight down on the car. This isn't how we would do weight dynamically on the track. But as far as scale numbers, all I have to do is make sure that I put the weight over where the center of the driver would be. So, about right there. Yep. A little bit forward. Get a couple more of them. Alright, so one more here. Now, so I've got that representing my driver right here. And scaling week to week. So like, yeah, it's a good idea. Have the driver in the car. And if you're making changes and stuff and you're trying to figure out exactly what the bike number is and everything, you probably need to have the driver in the car or an approximation of the driver. And, beyond that, like, write all your numbers down with the driver not in the car. And then, like, you're trying to return back into the shop and check to make sure your numbers are good. Or, you change a spring out or you do something. Well, if you've got a set of numbers wrote down without the driver and that's what you're going to, it's no problem at all. When you're making significant changes or you're going to change your percentages or things like that, really need to do that. Let me put some numbers up on the board and let's look at them. All right, so 734 and 667. 817 and 726. Okay, and my percentages here, let's see, 52.8 left. I've got 52.5 on the rear, 50.4% cross. And my left rear bite is the amount the left rear weighs more than the right rear. All right, so I've got 91 pounds of bite in this car. Okay, so a quick look at my numbers right here. 52.8% left, love it. 52 to 54% left, that's my jam. That's where I like my cars for the tracks that I run. On the rear, 52.5% rear, that is just fine. I don't really want this to be above 53 for sure, especially with Rachel starting out. You get up around 53, 54% on a stock car, you can start really running into having a lot of forward drive on the car that your setup's got to be really dialed in to get the car to rotate and turn. Because as you get more and more traction on the rear of the car, now your timing on your shocks, your ability to hold that weight over, keep that left rear from not overpowering and pushing you out, that becomes a lot more critical as this number goes up. Not really worried about the cross. I'm showing it here, but I'm paying much more attention to my left rear bite. That 91 pounds of left rear bite. So me and Rachel, I took the car to a practice, 3/8 mile track, totally dry slick. Watching the video, even when we were taking and freeing the car up by adding some bite to it, she was still having to turn the wheel because, you know, what I see at the track and what we talked about on that video versus me reviewing it afterwards, it's two different things. Watching her input on the steering wheel and everything, I felt like she was putting too much left input into the car. She was turned the wheel to the left and the tires were scrubbing the whole time. What does that tell me? Well, I want to go up on that number because I want, when she's off the throttle, I want for the left rear to have more authority in making the car turn in. Here's an analogy that I use a lot trying to explain this to new racers. If you go into a supermarket and you grab a shopping cart, okay, follow me here now. If I was to take and lift my hand off of the right side of the shopping cart, and I have got my hand all the way over here on the left side, and I push with only the left side on that shopping cart, which way does shopping cart turn? It's going to turn to the right. In other words, if I push over here, it's turning, right? Okay, if I took this one off and I grabbed this hand and I pushed, shopping cart's going to turn to the left. All right? Now, same thing happens on a car. Same deal. If I have got more weight on the left rear tire, that's like me pushing more with the left side. It's pushing the car out. Okay, you see that? If I had more weight on the right side, that's me pushing the car in on the throttle. But what about when I lift off the throttle and I'm on the brakes? Well, it's the same analogy. If I took and grabbed a shopping cart and I pull back with both, it comes back straight, okay? If I lift my right hand off and I take my left hand and I pull back with that shopping cart, what happens? The nose of that shopping cart turns left. If I pull here, shopping cart turns this way, all right? If I just grabbed it on the right side and I pulled, shopping cart would turn right. That's you when you let off the gas. When you lift, whichever tire has got more weight on it at that moment, it drags the car that direction. When you throttle up, whichever tire has got more weight on it, it pushes out from that side, you know, the opposite direction. All right? And so that's the analogy to get in your head. Now, once you understand that, now apply that to how your car is driving, entering the turn and exiting the turn. I'm entering the turn. I'm off the throttle. The car doesn't feel like it's turning in as easy as it should. That means I'm letting off the throttle and I'm dragging, right? But I'm not dragging enough with this left side. This left side needs to have more weight on it so that when I let off the gas, it turns the car in. And that's the effect that we had at the track when we ran. You know, the car was turning, but I felt like that she was turning the wheel further than she should have had to. So I want to add some more bite there. So I don't know if the shopping cart is a good way to kind of describe this for like new racers and a way to get your head wrapped around how left rear bite works on the car. Leave me a comment, let me know. We're just looking for the best way to be able to show this, especially to people just starting out, where they can kind of get their head wrapped around it and get a bite on this, start getting some success. Now, this 91 pounds right here, I want Rachel, the next time she goes out, I want this number to be like 125 to 150. I want to get the car to the point that when we're on a slick track again, that she's having to manage the rotation of the car on entry, not on exit. Okay, so last time we run it, the car was definitely tight on entry. She was over scrubbing that entry, and then she was managing the throttle off of the corner. So let's see if we can flip that. I want to get this up. All right, so let's get those ride heights and see what we can do to fix this number. We're doing the right side first. I'm going to take, see, I've got a 12-inch square here. And I'm just going to sit it right up against my bolt there. I'm looking at the center of my bolt on my square there. And I have got 10.5 inches is what I've got. 10.5. Then I'm going to turn around. And if I come straight forward on the car from where the center of the ball joint is, it's like where that's at on that lip right there. That's about the center of the ball itself. And when I put this square up there, I'm sitting at 10.5. So this lower control arm right here to the bolt was 10.5 and to the center of the ball joint was 10.5. That's a level lower control arm. So that's a really neutral spot. Okay, so that's the right side. And remember, these measurements that are 10.5 inches are on a 2-inch pad right there. So that's actually 8.5 in real ride height to the ground. All right, let's do the other side. I'm going to go center of the bolt. I can't, it's behind the center link, so you're not going to be able to see it. You just got to trust me. But, sure enough, 10.5. 10.5 there too. Okay, so the car is completely flat across the front. So that is how I measure ride height in the front of any car I race. Alright, so we're looking from the inside at my front of my driver's side spring here. So this is the left side here. And I measure to the center of the bolt in the leaf spring. This leaf is running uphill on the front toward this location by 2.2 degrees. If you can get this leaf right here to 0 or more, it will significantly help with forward drive in the car. It's going to help for the rear end to be able to pull weight, dynamic loading. So when the rear end twists, it's helping it to be able to put load into those tires and lift this. If it's running downhill, you're making that job a lot harder for the car. So you see mine, I'm at 2.2 degrees. That's the reason that I like that 2 degrees of rake in the car. That's the reason that I do that. Now, let's look at ride height. This is different than the front, completely different type of suspension, so you don't compare the numbers. But if I just take my square and put up here, I am at, see if I can see it here, 10 3/8 on the left side. All right, so we're going to do the right side, and it is, let's see, it is also 10 3/8 on the right side as well. On leaf spring cars, when we start talking about rear ride heights, lowering blocks and brackets become very critical. So I want to show you what's going on. So like I've got a lowering block here. How much lowering block is that? That is 1.5 inch lowering block. But let me tell you, when you start comparing lowering blocks and stuff like that, my number, and what really matters is the distance from the bottom of the tube to the leaf spring itself. So like my left rear right here, from the bottom of my tube to the top of my leaf spring is 2.5 inches. All right, now it was 3 inches at one time, but I've changed that. And then over here on my right side, I'm about 2 inches. So 2.5 inch space from the bottom of the tube to the top of the leaf on the left side. 2 inch space from the bottom of the tube to the leaf on the right side. So that means that there's a 1/2 inch less pressure on the left side because this is spacing the rear end up away from the leaf. That's taking weight out of the tire by doing that. But if we turn around and we look at where we're at on the back, center to center on this bracket here, I'm at 9 inches. You see I'm in that next to last hole, and that's 9 inches. And then if we turn around, we look at the left side, center to center for the left side, I'm at 10 inches. So I'm 10 inches to that bottom hole right there. So now that you've seen that, here's the real head scratcher. The car is sitting level, and I'm gonna go you one better. That 91 pounds of left rear bite is not being created by this rear setup at all. This rear setup is neutral, and here's the reason. So that 1/2 inch extra distance right there, we made up for it by dropping 1 inch at the rear. And so that made this spring from a pressure standpoint be equal to that one, even though we've got less space on that side. So that's how our holes on the back are changing our load, or in this case, actually making our load even. I hope that makes sense. I like anywhere from 2 inches to 3 inches as far as that space right there. And depending on your brackets, you know, a 1 inch spacer creates 2 inches total. You know, a 2 inch spacer, you know, creates 3 inches total for most brackets like you'd weld on to a rear end. All right. Now, the 91 pounds that we've got in the car is actually being created by the tire sizes and air pressures and the difference on the adjustment cups on the front of the car. I've got 2 different spring rates on the front of the car and stuff. That's where that 91 pounds is actually coming from. This back here, this is totally neutral. All right, so now let's talk about what we're fixing to do. All right, so I got the 8 3/8 on both sides on the rear. Now, I'm wanting to increase to 91 pounds, and I want to leave my rear alone the way it is, and the car doesn't need to be flat. I'm going to put Rachel with this car running with the left side slightly lower is what I want to do. And I can go about doing it 2 ways. I could take and I could raise the right front, or I could drop the left front, either one. And doing that is going to increase the bite while turning the car to the left. I don't think I have a problem with this car being able to transfer weight and continue to turn. I think as Rachel gets faster, what we're going to find is that the car turns very well. And the reason that I'm not as concerned with it with her driving as it is with me, I'm a lot heavier and my center of gravity is low in the car. And so for me, even with having all my weight mounted up as high as I could, you know, I was always running the right side of the car low. So like my ride heights, I'd run the right side of the car low because I was trying to help have that spring table pitch to the right and get the car to be able to stay over even with all of my weight down low on the left side of the car. Well, I've still got a lot of weight in the car mounted up high, but now Rachel weighs half what I do. And so for me, I believe to get this car to work well, I'm actually going to drop the left side of the car a little bit. And I think the car was going to do great. It may struggle to hold weight at first if her speed's not up. But as we get there and we get on, you know, tracks and she starts getting hooked up and putting more speed into the car on the turn, I think what I'm going to find is that I've got a good balance actually running the left side of the car lower. For that reason, I'm going to take some turns out of the left front spring cup because what we're going to target is dropping this enough that on the scale numbers I get up to between that 125 and 150. Now, just guessing, I got to take a couple of rounds out of this. This is probably going to drop down more like 8 3/8 is what it's probably going to go to. And then all of a sudden my numbers are going to start looking good and I'm going to re-record my ride heights and that's going to become my new standard for the car. And then of course as we run we'll adjust from there, remeasure in the shop. Alright, so let's adjust this left front. Hey, I just wanted to show you right quick. See this adjuster cup right here? If you can run adjuster cups, here's what I do. You see how I put these little slots? I put little 1/4 inch slots all the way around it. So I take a crowbar and that lets me be able to take that crowbar and hit those slots and turn them like that right there. And I did this on frames in the past when the frame wouldn't be open across that outside face like this Camaro is. I would just cut a slotted hole on the front side and the back side where I could stick a crowbar through there or a big flathead screwdriver and make the adjustment. Because it really, you know, if a track allows you to run a spring cup on the front, it really helps you so that if you need to make an adjustment, you're able to get in there and get that adjustment done without having to pop ball joints loose and, you know, take the shock out and do all of that to get the spring loose where you can turn it by hand. And if a track lets you run adjuster cups, but then they try to like disqualify you for putting slots in it, man, they must just hate their racers or something. I mean, surely nobody does that. But anyway, that's what I do. I don't normally turn on these at the track, but it gives you options, and it definitely makes it easier in the shop. Like now, I'm going to turn this thing a couple of rounds. We're going to put it back together and see what it says on the scales. So I ended up turning the cup up into it about 2.5 turns is what I ended up doing, and just everything changed by doing that. So you see I did drop from 8.5 inches to 8 3/8 on that left front. Stayed 8.5 on the right front, so the car is definitely pitched over to the left. Now look what it did on the rear. I went from 8 3/8 on the left rear down to 8 1/4 because I added pressure to that left rear, but the right rear actually came up from 8 3/8 up to 8 7/16. That makes sense because I dropped that left front, and so that put more pressure on the right front and the left rear, and it picked up on the right rear. And so on the back of the car, you had one go down and one come up by doing that. So an important point here is, you know, when you're adjusting, if you adjust on just one corner, you're affecting all your ride heights. Everything is changing when you change one number. If you're trying to maintain the exact same ride heights, you have to adjust equally the opposite corners in opposite directions. So like, if I go, you know, if I take weight off of the left front, I have to take weight off of the right rear while also adding weight to the left rear and the right front. So I have to do it opposite of each other in order to maintain that balance. In our case, we're wanting to intentionally pitch the car over. So this is exactly what we were after right here. Scale numbers changed quite a bit because of it. So we look at this, and now we have got 718 instead of 734, 684 instead of 667 on the front. On the rear, now I've got 834 on the left rear and 704 on the right rear. And of course, I'm not changing left numbers, I'm not changing rear numbers. And the reason that those aren't changing is because that's the static weight of the car. Think about it like this. When I'm shifting between the wedge of the car, I'm moving the balance, but overall the left side between the two. I may shift how much one weighs versus the other, but I'm not changing overall the differences between the left side and the right side, between the front and the back. So when we look at our bike ride here, we went from 91 pounds to 130 pounds. I put the wheel back on after about 2 turns and I was at like 120. So I went that other half a turn and I got it to 130 because my target was between 125 and 150. I said if I get in there, I'm going to stop. I got to 130, I'm stopping there. I really like because, you know, just that 1/8 inch of difference in the front lean to the left, I think that's really good. If I like pitched it over a lot more than that, I probably would have started, like I said, making adjustments on multiple corners to get the number without doing that much left side lean. So I like that 130 pounds. The cross, again, it went up because now I've got more pressure, you know, across on that right front, left rear than I did have. So that number went up as well. So these are our new baseline numbers that we're going back to the track with, but I want to show you what if I did not have a set of scales. 130 pounds right now on the car. Let's see what that looks like when we jack the back of the car up with a jack and a socket. Yeah. All right, y'all, check this out. I'm going to lay an impact socket right there in the middle of that jack. Let me set my camera down here. I'm going to put it right in the middle of that rear end, okay? Right there. All right, and I'm going to jack up on that socket like that until I see one tire's going to break the ground, and it should be the right rear break the ground first. Okay. All right, do you see that right rear break the ground right there? Okay, that's telling me that I got more left rear weight than I do right rear when it did that. Okay, now we're going to keep jacking it up until the left rear gets loose. Okay, not really breaks, but just gets loose. So just watch. I'm going up, I'm going up. It's not loose yet. I'm going to keep going up. Nope. I'll know when it's loose because that scale will start wiggling under it. Oh, right there. See that scale wiggling? Right there? All right, so I'm going to put it right there. You see that gap on that left rear? So this is as old school as it gets, but this is literally where I started when I first started racing. This gap right here represents your left rear bite because the difference in weight between the two rear tires is what is keeping the left side barely contacting the ground while this right side is up right here. And this amount, this distance, that right there is representative of the amount of the left rear bite. And so like if I take and I slide in here, that 1 inch just barely clears, okay? 1 inch of gap. And on this car, I know that 130 pounds of bite is about a 1 inch or just a hair over a 1 inch gap on the right rear for this car. It is going to change car to car, but here's what you can learn from it. If you don't have a set of scales at all, and you know, the first thing you do is you say, well, I want to make sure that I do have left rear bite in the car, you know, that there is more weight in the left rear than the right rear. Well, this gap right here, whether it be a ½ inch, an inch and a half, the gap is telling you that you've got it. You go to the track and you race, and the car is like either it's tight or it's loose on entry, and how it's acting on exit based on our shopping cart scenario we were talking about earlier. I'm sorry, it was the best analogy I could come up with, y'all. But based on how it acts at the track, you can turn around and you can come back home, put it in the shop, and you can do this and make an adjustment and measure this distance change. And that's going to give you some confidence that you are adding bite or taking bite away. You might not know exactly what the number is, but it's going to be going in the right direction, giving the car what it needs. And so even though you don't have scales, you're making an intelligent change that is going to help your car race better. And so that's a good starting point. All right, y'all, I know that was a lot, but I think we got it. Ride heights and scale numbers and how to do it. Leave me a comment, let me know. We're trying to do some technical videos here that anybody even just starting out covers all of those core things so that you can start from scratch and be able to get into street stock racing. We have got a ton of technical videos, so if you just found Dirt Race Life, definitely go check out our website, dirtracelife.com. I've got playlists with all of the different videos that have been categorized, whether it's engines, setups, at the track, then all kind of links to different things you see us use in the videos as well. So check us out there. Hey, shout out to Jeremy Allen. Jeremy joined us as an all-in sponsor. That's a really big deal for us. Our sponsors is how we're able to build cars, put them together, go racing. It is how I'm putting Rachel in this Camaro. I mean, no bones about it. Subscribe, of course, if you just found us, and see you next time.